So we started with this mystical conversation about the fact that the Jewish people received 2 crowns for saying Na'aseh v'nishma, saying that we will do and we will hear. And we said that there must be a connection between the crowns and the idea of Na'aseh v'nishma. And what we started to talk about is the fact that the crown is not just a physical crown, it also means something that is encompassing and beyond it. It also refers to the concept of silence that is above and beyond. And so that's what we're going to explore. And the way we're going to do this is, the Rebbe points out something very, very powerful in terms of our service of Hashem. So chapter 2, all this can be understood by first elaborating upon the process of spiritual service represented by the timeline of the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, so the Exodus from Egypt, as we've mentioned many times, is not just a historical event, it's also a daily and ongoing spiritual event. So no matter what stage of Judaism you're at, or what stage of religiosity or spirituality or anything of the sort, we are obligated to look at ourselves as in the process of leaving Egypt. And the word Egypt comes from the word Egypt in the Hebrew is Mitzrayim. It comes from the Hebrew word Metzarim, which means limitations. And we all have our spiritual limitations. We all have our internal pharaohs. We all have our ego that's trying to drive us to a particular direction. Slavery and all these things on a daily basis. This is not something that just happens once in life and, I've escaped. It's on a constant, there's a new dimension of it all the time. It's like playing a video game where you can complete one level and then you go to the next one, and it's just a lifelong journey. So this journey has 3 stages in it. God tells Moshe, when you take the nation out of Egypt, they will serve God on the mountain. So this denotes that the Exodus, which is in its spiritual corollary, is the beginning of the process of divine service, is the preliminary stage to receiving the Torah, the ultimate purpose of the process. So we have leaving Egypt, but what's the point of leaving Egypt? The point of leaving Egypt is getting to Mount Sinai. Getting to Mount Sinai, of course, is not getting there just for the purpose of the wonderful views or paying high prices for trinkets at the what do you call it, Shai? The memorabilia and souvenir shops.
Souvenir shop.
What? Souvenirs, yeah. We get to Mount Sinai for the purpose of receiving the Torah. So this is this process of leaving Egypt and getting to the point of receiving the Torah. We find that only 3 specific months are mentioned in direct conjunction with the Exodus. And they are Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan. Nisan, of course, is the month of Pesach. Iyar is the month that we're in right now. And Sivan is the month in which we have Matan Torah, the receiving of the Torah. So with regards to Nisan, of course, it talks about, Chodesh HaRishon Shabo Yatzata Mitzrayim B'Chodesh Aviv, the first month, the month of spring, when you left Egypt. That's number 1. So Nisan corresponds to the stage of the nation escaped. The Torah uses the term Ki Barach Ha'am, the nation ran away. So the first stage of the Exodus from Egypt, you've already realized that there's a Pharaoh, you realize that there's slavery, you recognize that, okay, I need to go. How do I get rid of this? And at that point, at that stage, the Jewish people were sunk deep in the 49th level of impurity, mired in absolute evil. In such a state, intellectual contemplation leading to the possibility of transforming evil into good is utterly impossible. So what this means is that the person realizes that I'm not in a good space. When we try to intellectually think about the fact that, oh, I'm not in a good space and therefore I want to be in a different space. How do I deal with it? Well, I need to think about myself and think about my self-esteem and think about my purpose and all that kind of thing. At this stage, those conversations are actually not just irrelevant, but they're somewhat destructive. You can't think about things when you're stuck in absolute evil. You can't have an intellectual discussion when you're in absolute evil. Because the intellectual discussion leads to rationalization of where you are. And at that stage, intellectual conversation is not just irrelevant, it's distracting and it can be destructive. So what do you do? He says the only alternative is the method of service known as itkafia. Itkafia means subjugation of the will, escape. Itkafia means that we subdue the evil inclination. You need to escape. That's not done through rationalization. That's not done through an intellectual process. It's a decision that I'm out of here. I need to subdue these feelings. I need to conquer these feelings. I need to subjugate these feelings. I need to control them. And that's not done through intellectual process. That's done through absolute decision making. That's done through escape, running away. So despite the fact that the subject has not yet refined his emotional energies and he remains in this unfortunate state, yet he subdues any desires being expressed in his thought, speech, and action as a slave who is running to escape his captors. So that's the first stage, is this idea of itkafia. You need to subdue these feelings. You can't start thinking about, okay, how do I use them in the proper way? That's not for right now. This first stage, you're still in a space of evil. The space of evil is basically that the desires themselves are evil. And the famous Talmudic statement called mitzabik iminuvel mitnavel. Anybody who wrestles with someone who's dirty becomes dirty themselves. And the Rebbe would quote this very, very often when giving people advice with regards to forbidden thoughts. So people think about, when they're trying to daven and suddenly they start thinking about some actress or something like that, or some inappropriate behavior or something like that. And they say, how do I get rid of it? And the Rebbe's answer is invariably to ignore it, to run away. Not to say, I need to, eradicate the thought from my thought. No, run away. The thought no longer exists. You're not controlled by the thought. The Rebbe would tell people, this is with regards to thought, of course. The Rebbe would tell people that you can only think one thing at a time. It's only possible to think one thing at a time. And it's a brilliant piece of advice, because when you're thinking something inappropriate, all you have to do is replace it with another series of thoughts. Start thinking about a park that you were at and a vacation that you were on, and then the thoughts are gone. You can put your mind somewhere else. When the mind is empty, then you start thinking negative thoughts. But when the mind is occupied with something that's constructive and something that's important, something that's special, something that is happy, all those things, then the mind ends up going in that direction, because the mind can only think one thing at a time. So every single time we get distracted, we need to take that approach. Escape. Don't start rationalizing with the thought that this thought is well, if this was the situation, then no, don't go there. Don't follow down that road. That road is not the place you want to go. That's with regards to thought. Speech. Speech, of course, is, sometimes when we're talking about something inappropriate. We'll get to Susan, we'll just get to you in a second. We get into a conversation where sometimes we realize that the conversation is not an appropriate conversation because it's lashon hara, or something that is inappropriate. So what do? Stop the conversation. Move the conversation somewhere else. Don't start rationalizing the conversation. The more you rationalize with it, the more you get involved with it, the more you get stuck in it more. Move on. We're out. Next. And of course, with regards to action, it's a famous story of a student in the Talmud who was, shall we say, ignited by his passions, and he went to find himself a certain prostitute that was very, very well known, and he was getting undressed, to go do his thing there, and his tzitz slapped him in the face, and he realized what he was doing. He got controlled of himself, and he started immediately running away. And the woman said to him, "So where are you going?" And he says, "Nah, this is inappropriate. I realize that this is totally inappropriate." And she was shocked because she said, "No man has ever been able to resist me." And it brought her to Judaism, whatever. The Talmud talks about this, but his recognition that what I need to do right now is run away. I need to leave. That's the first stage. Ki barach ha'am. Susan, what's your question?
So we're not supposed to try to face our evil head on, rather, in other words, going to therapy or going to doing any kind of psychoanalysis is not beneficial.
Not when it comes to evil. No.
I see.
No. It's removal. It's removal. You don't go there. Basically, right. That's what it is. Robert, go ahead. Robert?
I'm sorry, I came in late. We're in chapter 2 now?
Yeah, chapter 2.
Okay, I apologize to everyone.
Yeah, I came in late too. Susan, I don't think he's talking about not confronting evil. It just depends when. If you are in a point where you are doing something and then the evil thought hits you, so you're not prepared for it, you're not sitting there, you're doing something else, at that point, you are best off just running away.
Okay,
in terms of an act. Joseph, what did Yosef do? He didn't sit there rationalizing or whatever. When Potiphar's wife grabbed him, he ran. And that's
more clear. That's more understandable now.
Right. I have to get him to say okay first.
Well, it's interesting because when it comes to whatever you want, go ahead. What's interesting is when it comes to some of these things, you mentioned psychotherapy and things like that, and I think the second stage can talk a little bit more about the psychotherapeutic elements of it. But part of the first element of this conversation is something that is an important one. And it's an important subject of debate nowadays. There's the whole question with regards to homosexuality and how it's accepted in today's society and whatnot. And the question is, how does Judaism approach it? Of course, there's no question whatsoever that the homosexual act is forbidden. That's clearly stated in the Torah, and anybody who denies that is simply denying Torah. That's the absolute reality. The question is, how does a person deal with it? And so the Rebbe's approach to it is that and this is very simplistic, and I'm not going to say that this is the be-all, end-all, because I understand that there are things that are way beyond my pay grade. But this is my understanding of the Rebbe's approach. That the Rebbe's approach to it is that you do not identify yourself by your negativity. You do not identify yourself by the feelings that you have. So because somebody has a proclivity towards something does not make them into something. A person got to have extremely, extremely strong desires, whatever they are. And this would make homosexuality no different than any other desire to do things. It doesn't make a difference what it is. But the question is, how does the person identify themselves? What do they do as a result of that? So if a person identifies themselves as a Jew, and the definition of a Jew is a part of God himself, so then that sets up the whole conversation in a particular manner. The conversation is one of godly responsibility, and I put myself and my desires and my feelings aside. And the problem with the whole conversation now is that people identify as gay, and there's gay pride. So they identify in a particular manner, which separates themselves from other people, which puts them into a corner, and as a result of that, they cannot escape from it because they're getting into what we refer to in the Exodus story as a slavery mentality. They're identifying as slaves. They're not escaping. They're not looking at themselves as free people. Freedom is not just your capability of going where you want. Freedom is the capability of making the decisions, the ultimate decisions, including ones that go against your own feelings. Your ability to make the ultimate decision, that's what freedom is. And that's how we express the concept of the image of God. In the same way God has absolute free choice, we have absolute free choice, and we are not beholden to any feelings. So that's the Rebbe's approach. And God forbid, there's nothing against somebody who has these particular feelings whatsoever. Because everybody has some kind of inclination towards things that are inappropriate. And so therefore, when people say, oh, it's homophobic, it's not homophobic at all. It's not against a particular segment of people. It's taking an absolute statement that Torah tells us this behavior is inappropriate. Every single human being is expected to have this particular behavior. And if somebody fails in it, well, that's a particular failure, the same way that somebody who fails with Shabbos, or somebody fails with any other sexual sin, or anything else that goes on. That's part of who we are as people, and failures are part of life. And that's between yourself and God to be able to rectify. But we are not going to identify you as so that's a side point, which I think is a very truly progressive approach, because it doesn't get people stuck in a corner. People paint themselves in a corner and say, I am this, and so therefore I can't do anything else. This is who I am. But you can't grow if you start defining yourself in that way. And that's part of what we're going to see here. So the month of Nisan is Kibarach Ha'am, this idea of escape. When it comes to actual practical Torah and mitzvot, there's no time to wait and start measuring things out and analyzing things and be able to figure it out in order to be able to get to the space where I am in the mood to not do what's inappropriate or to do what is appropriate. There's none of that. Kibarach Ha'am. Kafia, you have to subdue the evil inclination. You have to subjugate your will to God's will. And that process is the first stage of the process. Then we have Iyar. B'chodesh Hasheni, the second month to the exodus of Egypt, as was referred to. So Iyar corresponds to the stage of refinement, represented by its central mitzvah, Sfirat HaOmer. So Sfirat HaOmer, of course, 49 days between the second night of Pesach and Shavuot. The Jewish people are counting down all the way to get to Kabbalat Torah, to receiving the Torah. And that's a stage of refinement. If you've been counting Sfirat HaOmer every single night, today is the 20th day of the Omer, you'll notice in the Hebrew it has a little prayer afterwards, and the prayer says that I should be able to refine a particular emotional attribute of myself. And the reason why is because 49 is 7 times 7. 7 emotional attributes have within them the 7 emotional attributes. And over these 49 days, we are meant to reflect on and attempt to correct and refine as much as possible each one of these elements of our personal selves as we lead up to the receiving of the Torah. And there's a process of refinement. And the Rebbe says, Sefira does not only mean counting, it also means shining. Sefira, Sfirut, Ubihirut. From the word sapphire, sapir. It means to refine. So this is a reference to the spiritual mode of service known as itapcha, transforming evil into good through the process of intellectually interacting with each emotional energy to refine and uplift it. What's that process? That is a process of analysis. That is a process of intellectual interaction. And the Rebbe says proper intellectual contemplation brings about the emotions of love and fear of God, and through them, eventually, all emotions are turned over to good. So you have chesed. Chesed, of course, means kindness, giving. Chesed can be good or it could be bad. There could be kindness in such a way that is wonderful, and everybody knows that if you give tzedakah to an appropriate institution, that is absolutely fantastic. What happens if you give tzedakah to Hezbollah? Is that tzedakah? Is that good? I'm giving. Hezbollah supports poor people in the territories. While that might be true, or Hamas, that might be true, sorry, Hezbollah is in Lebanon, sorry. All the same thing. While that might be true that they do some good things, but they do those things in order to be able to keep their people in line and in order to use them as terrorists, eventual terrorists. And so therefore, your quote unquote doing good is not doing good at all. So in this case, the chesed is chesed diklipa. This is inappropriate chesed because your chesed has been mismarked. You're heading the wrong direction. But more than that, you're a kind person. You, even within yourself, you're accepting of everybody. Is that appropriate? Not necessarily. There's sometimes to be able to say, no, I reject. Somebody who is an idol worshiper. There are specific halachot of how to deal with them. Now we're not going to decide here how to deal with those people, when it's applied, all that kind of thing. Speak to your local rabbi, whatever it is. But the fact is that it's not just plain and simple. Okay, love everybody. There's a point of discipline, and so therefore the chesed has to be a refined chesed, a chesed that's only used in the right and appropriate places. Now, within chesed, the general concept of chesed, you have also deeper elements. You have chesed within chesed. In other words, the most extreme element of chesed. And then you have gvura sheba chesed. You have a more aggressive element of chesed, shall we say. And each one of these things are the deepest elements of ourselves, of our personality, that can be thought of and used out in a particular way in order to be able to reach self-refinement. That is done by thinking through this process, how it applies to myself. So just as an example, I am not a naturally disciplined person. My nature is far more chesed than it is gvura. Gvura is discipline. And so I know that I need to teach myself the aspects of discipline. I know I need to bring that into my personality. That doesn't mean that I need to break my chesed elements. It just means that I need to steer my chesed elements in such a way that they absorb more discipline, and in such a way that the choices that I'm making are not based on my nature, but based on what is correct, what is meant to be done in any particular circumstance. So this process of kind of going through ourselves and thinking about ourselves, how we interact with other people, how we serve God in these particular ways. Our chesed element of serving God is our love of God and how that expresses itself. Our gvura element of serving God is how we fear God and how we stay away from evil and how we try to avoid sin and such things. How do we apply those things within ourselves? Both of these aspects are part of Sfirat HaOmer. But this is fully an intellectual analysis. But the Rebbe points out this stage can only take place after the prior step of escape, because so long as one is still sunk in evil, intellectual contemplation and refinement are not possible. They're not shaykh in the Hebrew term. There's no relevance. You can't escape. You can't bring yourself to a higher level if you're still sunk within evil. And a person can't work on self-refinement when they're spending their days on, on Skid Row with the women of the night. It doesn't work that way. You cannot refine yourself when that's what you're interacting with. And the only way you can work with refinement is if you decide, I'm not going to do those things. I'm not going to do something that's inappropriate. I am going to run away. And then you can start working on the intellectual process.
Okay.
They're indulging in kosher food because they're totally focused on the taste and the pleasure and the excitement of the food, not focused on, oh my gosh, I didn't realize we are already overboard. But then they're not focused on, of course, serving God. And so the only way to be able to truly supersede and to truly escape the bounds are by this process of first escaping out of evil, then afterwards transforming oneself, refining oneself through the intellectual process. And that brings a person to self-refinement so that the person can work within their permissible desires, so that the permissible desires are more focused and more refined and more under control. So and then afterwards, the final stage of everything is Sivan, which is the giving of the Torah, and we will talk about that, God willing, this coming Wednesday. I'll be in a conference, so I'll be in touch with Rabbi Smith to see whether or not I'll be able to teach. I need to find out the schedule of that. But thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Thank you.
Like us in.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Only good things.
Thank you.